The air in Las Vegas always felt heavy to Elvis, like a thick, glittering blanket woven from stale cigarette smoke, expensive perfume, and the desperate clink of slot machines. It was 1974, and the Hilton showroom, night after night. He'd walk out on that stage, the roar of the crowd, a familiar wave, and for a few precious moments, the magic would flicker. Sing, he'd sweat, he'd lose himself in the rhythm and feel the connection with the thousands of faces. Looking up at him, they loved him, adored him, screamed his name. He was the king. But when the lights faded and the last encore ended, the magic died. Backstage, the cheers still echoed in his ears, but they felt hollow. He'd shed the sequin jumpsuit, the sweat still clinging to his skin, and the weight of the gold felt heavier than ever. He was tired. Tired of the same songs, the same routine, the same hotel suite, tired of the feeling that he was an exhibit, not an artist. He'd talk about it sometimes late at night to Joe Esposito or Jerry Schilling, his closest friends and confidants. There's got to be more fellas, he'd sigh, picking at a late-night plate of scrambled eggs. Something bigger. I feel like I'm stuck in quicksand, decorated with diamonds. They knew what he meant. Craved challenge. Novelty, a true connection beyond the bright lights of Vegas. He yearned to see the world, to take his music to places where his records might have reached, but his physical presence hadn't. He dreamed of standing on a stage in London or Tokyo, or even behind the Iron Curtain, singing to people who had only ever heard him on a scratchy kaimai. The words, "World Tour," would sometimes slip out, a wistful whisper, but the response was always the same. A booming, dismissive laugh from the man who controlled every aspect of his life. "Colonel Tom Parker. World Tour, Elvis, what for? We've got the world right here," the colonel would declare, gesturing broadly around the gaudy office at the Hilton. "Folks come to you, boy, and they pay good money for it. You think we're going to drag you all over God's green earth for peanuts? Nonsense. Vegas is a gold mine. Hollywood, when we feel like it. No need to complicate things." Colonel was a master manipulator, a former carnival barker who had transformed Elvis into the biggest star on the planet, but also, inadvertently, into his greatest prisoner. Every contract, every decision, every movement was filtered through the colonel's singular vision: maximum profit, minimum fuss, and absolute control. A world tour was too messy, too unpredictable, too far outside his carefully constructed domain. It meant losing control, and Colonel Parker never lost control. Elvis would try to argue to explain the longing in his heart. "It's not about the money, Colonel. It's about the music. About reaching out. Imagine playing in front of people who've never seen me live, who only know me from records. It'd be special." The colonel would just pat his arm, a patronizing smile on his face. "Special, boy. Every show you do is special. Now let's talk about that new album cover. We need something with more glitter." The conversations would go nowhere. Elvis would retreat, the weight of the gold pressing down on him, the dreams of faraway stages fading into the familiar gloom of his suite. He'd watch late-night movies, sometimes even pick up a guitar, but the joy of creation felt dulled, overshadowed by the monotony. He felt like a magnificent show dog trotted out to perform tricks, then put back in his kennel. One evening, after a particularly grueling string of shows, Elvis sat in the darkened living room of his Beverly Hills home. Far from the Vegas Strip, he held a well-worn Bible, but his eyes weren't on the words. They were on the framed photograph on the mantelpiece. A young Elvis, vibrant and hungry, electrifying a small crowd in Tupelo. That boy had just wanted to sing, to move, to connect. He closed his eyes, and a single desperate thought formed in his mind. There has to be another way. He just didn't know what it was, or if he even had the strength to find it. He knew defying the colonel was almost unthinkable. It was like breaking the unbreakable chains. But the alternative, staying trapped, felt like a slow, agonizing suffocation. The heavy gold was beginning to feel like iron. The phone rang, startling him from his thoughts. It was Joe. "Elvis, you?" "Okay, boss, heard you were looking. I lit everything." "Elvis, Maulvi, Cree, Elvis, stuff, Mop Elvis." He had no idea then that a whisper from a far-off city carried on the wind was already stirring. A whisper that would eventually turn into a roar, shattering the silence of his gilded cage and offering a way out. A way that would demand courage he wasn't sure he possessed, but promise of freedom he desperately craved. Miles away across the Atlantic, in a dimly lit office overlooking the Thames, a man named Arthur Hayes was drawing circles on a map of the world. Arthur wasn't your typical music promoter. He wasn't about the quick buck or the flashing lights. He was a visionary. Some called him a dreamer, others a fool. He ran a small independent production company focused on cultural exchange, not just concerts. He believed music had the power to heal, to unite, to transcend borders. And his current obsession, the impossible dream, was Elvis Presley. Arthur had been following Elvis's career for years, ever since he first heard Heartbreak Hotel as a young man. He saw beyond the glitz and the Vegas routine. He saw the raw talent, the soulful voice, the genuine charisma that could move mountains. And he also saw the sadness in Elvis's eyes, even in the most electrifying performances. Arthur had a theory. Elvis was trapped. He was being held back from his true potential, from reaching a global audience that truly yearned for him. "It's madness, Arthur," his assistant, Sarah, said, sipping her lukewarm tea. She was a practical woman, loyal but grounded. "Colonel Parker would never agree. He's notorious. He controls everything. The man probably owns Elvis's socks." Arthur chuckled, tracing a line from London to Tokyo. "Precisely why we don't go to the Colonel. We go around him. We go to Elvis." Sarah raised an eyebrow. "And how exactly do you propose to do that? Walk up to him in Vegas and offer him a cup of tea and a ticket to Beijing?" "No," Arthur said, leaning back in his creaky chair. "We offer him something he can't get from Parker: freedom, purpose, a chance to truly connect with the world, not just a room full of gamblers." His plan was audacious, bordering on insane. He envisioned a world tour, unlike any other. Not just stadium shows, but concerts in historical venues, outdoor performances in breathtaking landscapes, even intimate cultural exchanges. He wanted Elvis to see the world, not just fly over it. He wanted to film it, document it, turn it into a global event that transcended entertainment and became a movement of peace, connection, and understanding through music. Arthur had already started making discreet inquiries. He'd talked to people who knew people, avoiding any official channels that would alert Colonel Parker. He'd found a well-respected lawyer in Los Angeles, a quiet man named Thomas Miller, who had a reputation for handling sensitive high-stakes negotiations, often involving artists who felt stifled by their management. Miller had connections to Elvis's inner circle, particularly Joe Esposito, who is known to be fiercely loyal but Elvis's well-being. One rainy Tuesday, Arthur placed a call to Miller's office. "Mr. Miller," Arthur began, his voice calm but resolute. "My name is Arthur Hayes. I represent Hayes International Productions. I have a proposition regarding Elvis Presley. It's entirely confidential. And I assure you, it's not what you think." Miller, intrigued by the unusual preamble, agreed to a virtual meeting. Arthur laid out his vision, meticulously detailing the logistical challenges, the potential financial pitfalls, but most importantly, the profound artistic and humanitarian benefits. He spoke of the global yearning for Elvis, the opportunity to bridge cultures, to use music as a universal language. "This isn't just a concert tour, Mr. Miller," Arthur explained, his eyes shining with conviction. "Colonel Parker won't like it because he can't control it. But Elvis might feel differently." Miller listened, absorbing every word. He knew the stories, the whispers about Elvis's unhappiness, his desire for more. He saw the genuine passion in Arthur's eyes. This wasn't some opportunistic con man. This was someone who believed, truly believed, in the power of music and in Elvis's unique ability to deliver it. "It's a dangerous game," Mr. Hayes Miller finally said, his voice grave. "Colonel Parker's contracts are ironclad. Breaking them would be messy, very messy." "We're not breaking anything, Mr. Miller," Arthur countered smoothly. "We're offering an opportunity that the Colonel, in his infinite wisdom, has consistently denied Elvis. If Elvis chooses to pursue it, that's his choice. We simply provide the framework." Miller promised to discreetly relay the proposal to Joe Esposito. He made no guarantees, the risks were enormous. But he felt a stir of excitement, a ever improbable, might just be the very thing Elvis needed. Back in his Vegas suite, Elvis felt a strange restlessness. He picked up the phone, calling Joe. "Anything at all?" Joe paused, thinking of his conversation with Miller. "Well, boss, something unusual came across my desk today. Nothing concrete, just a thought." "A thought about what?" Elvis asked, his voice tinged with a flicker of hope he tried to suppress. "A thought about the world, boss," Joe said cryptically. The Colonel finally having a change of heart. "Not exactly," Joe chuckled. "Think outside the box, boss. Way outside the box." A seed of curiosity, tiny but persistent, began to sprout in Elvis's mind. Outside the box, that sounded appealing. Anything to escape the square confines of his gilded cage. He had no idea the thought Joe mentioned was about to become the most extraordinary proposition of his life, one that could set him free or plunge him into a battle fiercer than any he'd ever fought. Joe Esposito was a loyal man, loyal to Elvis above all else. When Thomas Miller, the LA lawyer, had whispered about an unconventional proposal for a world tour, Joe's instincts screamed caution. Colonel Parker was a force of nature, and crossing him was akin to stepping in front of a speeding train. But then Miller had outlined the vision, the humanitarian aspect, the promise of genuine connection, and something deep inside. He saw the spark in Arthur Hayes' eyes, felt the sincerity. More importantly, he saw the deep, quiet despair in Elvis's. So Joe had taken the risk. He presented the idea to Elvis, framing it not as a defiance of Parker, but as an opportunity for artistic fulfillment. Elvis, initially dismissive, grew quiet as Joe painted the picture of a tour that wasn't just about money, but about meaning. "They're talking about playing in ancient amphitheaters. Not just arenas," Joe explained, pacing the hotel room. "They want to film and die. The world, the real you. Not just the Vegas showman. They each one, somewhere truly iconic, to cap it all off for peace, for unity." He knew dreams often turned into nightmares in the music business. "This Arthur Hayes, he seems different," Joe pressed. "He wants to meet, just talk. No commitments, totally off the record, away from Vegas. Maybe Graceland?" A meeting at Graceland was a rare thing for business, a sanctuary. But the idea of escape, of a vision beyond the Hilton, was too tempting. "Okay, Joe," Elvis finally said, a flicker of something in his eyes. "Set it up," but no word to the Colonel, not a whisper. The day of the meeting felt charged with a quiet tension. Arthur Hayes, accompanied by Thomas Miller, flew into Memphis under the guise of an architectural interest tour. They arrived at Graceland, a nervous energy humming between them. Elvis met them in the living room, dressed casually, looking a little drawn but alert. He offered them lemonade, a courtesy that immediately disarmed Arthur. This wasn't a distant, imperious king. This was a man. Arthur wasted no time. He pulled out a large, leather-bound portfolio, filled with meticulously researched plans, beautiful illustrations, and a proposed itinerary that read like an adventure novel. He spoke with quiet passion, his voice carrying the weight of conviction. "Mr. Presley," Arthur began, "the world has been waiting for you. Not just the United States, the entire world. We believe your music, your message transcends language and culture. We envisions a tour that celebrates that. He showed Elvis concept art for concerts at the Colosseum in Rome, with special historical permits, of course, a performance in front of the Sydney Opera House, a majestic show at the foot of Mount Fuji. He spoke of charitable endeavors at each stop, local musicians joining him on stage, cultural exchanges, and a spirit of collaboration. Imagine Arthur can hitch a ride. A concert in Jerusalem, broadcast, lived to every corner of the earth. A message of peace delivered through your voice, uniting people who might otherwise be divided. This is a moment in history, a chance to use your incredible platform, something truly prominent in history. His gaze drifted over the images, his fingers tracing the outlines of ancient monuments. He saw himself not as the Vegas showman, but as an artist, a messenger. The idea of playing in Jerusalem, of all places, sent a shiver down his spine. He was a deeply spiritual man, and the thought of bringing his music to the Holy Land with a message of peace was almost overwhelming. He remembered his mother Gladys and how she'd always instilled in him a sense of purpose beyond fame. He remembered his early days performing in small towns, feeling the raw, unfiltered connection with people. This tour, as Arthur described it, felt like a return to that purity, but on a grand global scale. "Colonel Parker, you'll never agree to this," Elvis finally said, his voice slow. It wasn't a question, but a statement of fact. "No, he won't," Arthur agreed, unflinching, "because it's not his vision. This is your vision, Mr. Presley, your legacy. We're offering you a way to reclaim it. We're prepared to handle the legal ramifications, to provide the support you'll need. We have the funding, the logistics, the team ready to make this happen, but only if you truly want it. Mr. Presley, we've thoroughly reviewed the existing contracts. It would be challenging, but not impossible, Colonel Parker. But he doesn't own your life. There are clauses, and there are precedents for artists seeking creative freedom. It won't be easy, but it is achievable if you are resolute." Elvis leaned back, exhaling slowly. The air in the room felt lighter, clearer than the stale Vegas smoke. A tiny, fragile spark had ignited within him. It wasn't about the money, certainly not about the fame anymore. It was about feeling alive again. It was about purpose. It was about that one concert, the idea of standing on sacred ground, singing for peace. "What if it fails?" Elvis asked, a trace of his natural humility in his voice. "What if nobody comes? What if I'm not what they expect?" "Mr. Presley, with all due respect, the world already knows what you are. They know your voice, your heart, and they are waiting. The only failure would be not to try." Elvis looked out the window at the sweeping lawns of Graceland, a place of peace and refuge. He imagined those other places, those faraway lands, filled with faces he had never seen, but who knew his songs. The weight of gold, for the first time in years, began to feel lighter. He felt a stir of hope, a whisper of a dream he'd thought long dead. He didn't say yes right away, but he didn't say no. He simply nodded, a silent agreement to consider the impossible. And in that nod, a seed of revolution was planted, waiting for the right moment to sprout. The secret meeting at Graceland was over, but the conversation had just begun, a conversation that would ripple across continents and change the course of history. The days following the secret meeting at Graceland were a blur of restless energy for Elvis. Couldn't shake the images Arthur Hayes had painted. The Colosseum, Mount Fuji, the Great Wall, and most powerfully, Jerusalem. The idea of singing for peace, of using his voice for something so much bigger than himself, resonated deeply with his spiritual side. He saw a way out of the golden cage, not through escape, but through purpose. He spent hours walking the grounds of Graceland, talking to himself, wrestling with the implications. The logical part of his brain screamed caution. Colonel Parker was a formidable opponent, a master of legal maneuvering and psychological warfare. Defying him would be a declaration of war. It would be ugly, public, and potentially devastating to his career, not to mention his finances. Called Joe Esposito every few hours, rehashing the pros and cons. What if it's a trap, Joe? What if it's just another way to exploit me? Boss, I've looked these folks in the eye. They're genuine, Joe assured him. And Thomas Miller, he's solid. He wouldn't be involved if he thought it was a scam. They want to set you free, Elvis. Give you back your art. Elvis knew what he meant. For too long, his art had felt like a product packaged and sold by others. The movies had become rote, the Vegas shows repetitive. He missed the raw excitement, the spontaneity, the hunger he felt when he was first starting out. He missed the feeling of truly connecting, of his music being a bridge rather than a wall. He thought of his fans, the millions around the world who had written him letters, who had traveled great distances to see him. They weren't just paying customers, they were his people. They were why he sang, and he felt a profound responsibility to give them his best, his most authentic self, not just a tired imitation. One evening he sat in his mother's old room, a place that always brought him comfort. He looked at her portrait, her kind eyes seeming to watch over him. He remembered her dreams for him, not just of fame and fortune, but of happiness and fulfillment. Would she want him to stay trapped even in comfort? Or would she want him to take a risk, to pursue a dream that offered true meaning? He picked up his guitar, a worn acoustic he rarely played anymore. His fingers found the familiar chords of Amazing Grace. He sang softly, his voice raw and filled with emotion. As the notes filled the quiet room, a sense of clarity washed over him. This wasn't just about him anymore. It was about the music, about the message, about the millions who needed hope and connection. The Vegas shows had become a gilded cage, but the world tour with its promise of purpose felt like a wide open sky. The risk was immense. Yes, but the reward, genuine freedom, artistic integrity, and a chance to make a real difference, felt infinitely greater. He could not in good conscience turn away from it. He thought of the Colonel, his booming voice, his shrewd eyes. There would be a battle. But Elvis had fought battles before, battles for his soul, battles for his sound. This one would be the biggest, but he wouldn't be fighting alone. He had Joe, Jerry, and now Arthur Hayes and Thomas Miller, a small but determined army ready to stand with him. He put down the guitar, his mind made up. "Joe," he said, his voice calm, resolute. "Tell Mr. Hayes, tell him I'm in. Tell him to get ready. The King is going on tour, the world tour." Joe let out a whoop of triumph on the other end of the line. "You got it, boss. This is going to be incredible." Elvis hung up, a quiet smile playing on his lips. There was no fanfare, no press conference, no dramatic announcement. Just a quiet yes in the sanctity of Graceland. It was a personal revolution, a silent declaration of independence. He immediately called his father Vernon to tell him. Vernon, always pragmatic, listened carefully. "Son, you know what this means for the Colonel. He's not going to like it one bit." "I know, Dad," Elvis replied, his voice firm. "But I can't stay where I am, not anymore. I need to do this for me, for the music," Vernon sighed, but there was a note of pride in his voice. "Well, if you're sure, son, we'll be right here, supporting you always." The yes felt both terrifying and exhilarating. It was a decision that would shatter his comfortable yet suffocating existence. It meant stepping into the unknown, facing down the most powerful force in his life, and embracing a dream that had seemed utterly unattainable. Later that night, as the stars twinkled above Graceland, Elvis felt a lightness he hadn't experienced in years. The weight of the gold was still there, a memory, but it no longer felt crushing. He had made a choice, not just for his career, but for his soul. The path ahead would be fraught with challenges, battles, and moments of doubt. But for the first time in a long time, Elvis Presley felt truly wonderfully alive. The quiet yes was just the beginning. The world tour and the storm it would unleash was about to begin. The news hit Colonel Tom Parker like a lightning bolt. Not through an official channel, of course, but through a whispered rumor, then a confirmed tip from a disgruntled assistant in Miller's office. Elvis Presley, his prized possession, his golden goose, was planning a world tour without him. Worse, a world tour with a charitable humanitarian bent, utterly devoid of Parker's usual commercial calculations. Parker's face, usually a mask of jovial shrewdness, contorted into a mask of pure rage. He slammed his fist on his desk, sending papers flying. A world tour without me. That ungrateful boy. Who does he think he is? He immediately dispatched his legal team to prepare injunctions, lawsuits, anything to halt the audacious plan. His phone calls to Graceland were blistering, full of threats and accusations. He threatened to sue Arthur Hayes and Thomas Miller into oblivion. He threatened to expose Elvis, to paint him as a fickle, irresponsible artist, abandoning his loyal American fans for some pipe dream. Elvis, for his part, had braced for the storm. He took Parker's calls, listening to the furious tirades with a calm he hadn't known he possessed. "Colonel, this is something I have to do," he said, his voice steady. "This isn't about you, it's about the music. About my connection to the people." "Connection? Boy, I made your connection." Parker roared. "I built this empire. You owe me." "You're under contract to perform, Colonel," Elvis countered. "And I will, but my life, my choices, my spirit, those aren't for sale." Parker hung up, seething. Turned to the media, releasing carefully worded statements designed to sow doubt and fear. "Mr. Presley is undergoing a period of artistic exploration." One statement read, implying eccentricity. Another suggested, "Unscrupulous elements are attempting to exploit Mr. Presley's generosity." He painted Arthur Hayes as a charlatan and Elvis as a naive, misguided star. But Arthur and Miller were prepared. They had anticipated Parker's scorched earth tactics. Miller immediately filed preemptive legal challenges, arguing that Parker's contracts, while broad, did not give him absolute control over Elvis's artistic decisions or his personal life. If those decisions involved humanitarian efforts. Arthur released a counter-statement, simple and direct. Elvis Presley wishes to take his music to the world, to share a message of peace and unity. Hayes International Productions is honored to facilitate this dream. The news exploded. Headlines screamed, "Elvis ditches Parker for world tour. King seeks global throne. Legal battle looms for Presley." Public reaction was a mixture of stunned excitement and wary skepticism. Fans were thrilled at the prospect of seeing Elvis in their own countries. Music critics debated whether it was a brilliant move or a desperate attempt to revive a career they believed was stagnating. Some predicted disaster, saying Elvis was too fragile, too set in his ways to endure a grueling world tour. Elvis tried to block out the noise, focusing instead on the intense preparations for the tour. He threw himself into rehearsals with renewed vigor, experimenting with new arrangements, revisiting old songs, and even writing new material, something he hadn't done consistently in years. He worked out, ate healthier, shedding some of the weariness that had weighed him down. He gathered his core band and trusted Memphis Mafia, members explaining the vision, igniting their excitement. "This ain't gonna be easy, boys," Elvis told them, his eyes gleaming with determination. "Colonel's gonna fight us every step of the way, but this is bigger than all of us. This is for the world. This is for the music." His band musicians, who had played with him for years, saw the spark back in his eyes, the fire in his belly. They rallied around him, ready to face the storm alongside their king. In the midst of the legal wrangling and media frenzy, a small independent film crew arrived at Graceland, led by a quiet, thoughtful director. Arthur had hired. They began to film Elvis's preparations, capturing intimate moments of him, rehearsing, discussing his vision, and reflecting on his career. This footage would become the backbone of the Global Connection documentary, a powerful counter-narrative to Parker's smear campaign. The battle with Colonel Parker raged in the courts and in the tabloids. Lawyers argued. Injunctions were sought, but the sheer force of Elvis's determination, coupled with Miller's shrewd legal strategy, began to turn the tide. Parker found his iron grip loosening. The public sympathy, sensing Elvis's desire for artistic freedom, began to shift in his favor. Fan mail poured into Graceland, messages of support from across the globe. One morning, Elvis walked out onto the veranda at Graceland, feeling the Memphis sun on his face. The initial shock of Parker's fury had passed. He felt a quiet strength, a sense of purpose. He was no longer reacting to Parker. He was moving forward, taking control of his own destiny. The world tour was no longer a secret dream. It was a reality. A behemoth gathering momentum. The first concert date was set, London at the legendary Wembley Arena. A symbolic choice, breaking ground in a country that had always loved him, but which he had never played live. The storm had broken, and Elvis was standing in the eye of it, not broken, but stronger. He knew the fight wasn't over, but he also knew deep in his heart that he had made the right choice. The weight of the gold was finally lifting, replaced by the boundless, exhilarating weight of hope. He was ready to face the world, one song, one city, one groundbreaking concert at a time. The plane touched down at Heathrow, London, shrouded in a typical English drizzle. Despite the weather, a roar erupted from the crowd gathered outside the airport, a sea of faces holding up signs, waving flags, and chanting his name. Elvis Presley had finally arrived. He stepped off the plane, a nervous tremor in his hands, but a wide, genuine smile on his face. He hadn't played a concert outside of North America in his entire career. This was it, the first step of the Global Connection Tour. The initial days in London were a whirlwind of press conferences, interviews, and sound checks. The British press, known for their sharp wit, were initially skeptical, some still influenced by Colonel Parker's negative PR. "Is the king still got it?" One headline scoffed, "Vegas act on tour?" But Elvis met them with humility and a renewed spark in his eyes. "I'm here to sing," he told a room full of reporters, his voice calm and earnest. "To connect with the people who've supported me all these years. This isn't about being the king anymore. It's about sharing music, about understanding each other." The first concert at Wembley Arena was a sellout, of course, but the atmosphere was different from Vegas. There was a raw anticipation, a hunger in the audience that felt almost palpable. Backstage, Elvis felt the familiar pre-show jitters, but also an electric excitement he hadn't felt in years. He smoothed down his hair, adjusted his new, slightly more understated but still dazzling, stage wear. His band, Joe Esposito, Jerry Schilling, and Arthur Hayes stood beside him, a silent show of support. "You got this, E?" Joe whispered, clapping him on the shoulder. Arthur smiled. "The world is waiting, Mr. Presley." Then the lights dimmed. The opening chords of "Also Sprach Zarathustra" thundered through the arena. The crowd erupted. Elvis walked out, not with the practiced swagger of the Vegas showman, but with a quiet, confident grace. He looked out at the sea of faces, a mix of young and old tears. In some eyes, pure joy, in others. He opened with "C.C. Ryder," and the energy was immediate. His voice was strong, powerful, imbued with a passion that had seemed dulled in recent years. He moved across the stage, less reliant on the flashy karate moves, more focused on the emotion of the music. He paused between songs, talking to the crowd, sharing anecdotes, a genuine warmth radiating from him. "Been a long time coming, folks," he said, his southern drawl charming the London crowd. "And let me tell you, it feels good to be here, real good." He sang his classics, Jailhouse, Rock, Hound Dog, Love Me Tender, but with a freshness, a renewed interpretation that breathed new life into them. He also unveiled new material, soulful ballads and rock anthems that reflected his journey and his newfound sense of purpose. The reviews were scoffed. Elvis Reborn, king returns to his throne, but this time, it's a global one. The Wembley concerts were a triumph, but the tour was more than just the big shows. Arthur had ensured that. Elvis visited a local children's hospital singing quietly for the young patients, his eyes moist with emotion. He held an informal jam session with British musicians, sharing stories and laughter. He walked the streets of London, albeit with security, and caught glimpses of everyday life, something he rarely did back home. These smaller moments were just as awful as the concerts. They humanized him, allowing him to connect on a deeper level, not just as a performing icon, but as a man who genuinely cared. As the London leg concluded and they prepared for the next stop, Paris, Elvis felt an exhaustion, but it was a good kind of tired. A fulfilling weariness. He was no longer just the Vegas headliner, he was an explorer. He called Priscilla, his ex-wife, who he remained close to from his Paris hotel room. "Priscilla, you wouldn't believe it," he said, his voice filled with wonder. "People here, they're amazing, they truly are. It feels right, all of it." He could hear the relief in her voice. "I always knew you had more to give. Elvis, I'm so proud of you." The challenges were still there. The jet lag was brutal. The constant travel was draining. And Colonel Parker's legal battles continued to simmer in the background, a low, persistent rumble. But they no longer felt insurmountable. The overwhelming wave of support from fans, the positive media attention, and the pure joy of performing again freely and authentically fueled him. As he walked onto the stage in Paris, the Eiffel Tower twinkling in the distance, Elvis looked out at the French crowd, their faces eager, expectant. He took a deep breath. This was why he had said, yes, this was just the beginning of a journey that would redefine his legacy. One heartfelt note at a time, echoing across oceans, uniting the world. From the iconic beauty of Paris, the Global Connection Tour soared across continents, a magnificent moving symphony. Each city, each country brought new experiences, new connections, new revelations for Elvis. He was no longer just Elvis Presley, the American king of rock and roll. He was a global phenomenon, a cultural bridge. In Rome, he performed a breathtaking outdoor concert near the ancient Colosseum, special permits secured after months of negotiation. The historic stone seemed to vibrate with the energy of his voice as he sang "Crying in the Chapel" and "If I Can Dream," infusing them with a gravitas that transcended pop music. He visited the Vatican, humbled by the spiritual atmosphere, and later spent an afternoon at a local orphanage singing lullabies to children and leaving them with autographed photos and his trademark scarves. The moments were poignant, real, and far more meaningful than any Vegas curtain call. Next, it was on to Tokyo. The Japanese fans, known for their deep respect and fervent devotion, greeted him with an almost reverent enthusiasm. Elvis, fascinated by the culture, spent time exploring traditional gardens and even attempting a few phrases in Japanese, much to the delight of the local media. His concerts there were electrifying, a fusion of his raw energy with the quiet intensity of the audience. He held a workshop with young Japanese musicians, sharing insights, listening to their music, and offering encouragement, truly embracing the cultural exchange aspect of the tour. The journey continued, taking him to places he had only ever seen on maps. To Sydney, Australia, where he stood on the steps of the Opera House, marveling at its unique architecture, before performing a show that lit up the harbor. To Rio de Janeiro, Brazil, where the vibrant energy of the crowd matched his own, and he found himself dancing with a freedom he hadn't felt in years. He even managed a brief, carefully guarded visit to a small village in the Amazon, meeting indigenous communities, a naïve but deeply moving experience that broadened his perspective on humanity. Arthur Hayes and Thomas Miller worked tirelessly, handling the complex logistics, security, and the ongoing legal skirmishes with Colonel Parker, which continued to flare up, though with less intensity. They ensured Elvis had moments of rest, privacy, and opportunities to truly absorb the cultures around him. Joe and Jerry, always by his side, watched with pride, as Elvis shed the layers of weariness and disillusionment, revealing the passionate artist underneath. He was thinner, healthier, and his eyes, once haunted by a quiet sadness, now sparkled with curiosity and joy. He was constantly learning, absorbing, growing. Tried new foods, listened to local music, and even collected small, meaningful artifacts from each country. Not expensive gifts, but simple tokens of connection. A handmade wooden carving from an artisan in Africa, a silk scarf from China, a small piece of pottery from Greece. The Global Connection documentary filmed every step of the way, captured these moments, showing the world an Elvis they had never seen. Humble, curious, deeply engaged, and truly happy. The footage revealed not just a musical journey, but a spiritual one. One particular experience stood out. In a small village in rural India, far from any major concert venue, Elvis held an impromptu performance. He'd arrived unexpectedly, drawn by a local festival Arthur had heard about. Word spread like wildfire, and hundreds gathered, many of whom had never seen a Westerner, let alone a global icon. He sat on a makeshift stage, accompanied only by his acoustic guitar, and sang gospel songs, spirituals, and a few of his softer ballads. The language barrier melted away. The villagers listened, captivated, their faces reflecting a deep understanding of the emotion in his voice. Afterward, he spoke to them through a translator. About the universal language of music, about love and hope. He saw tears in their eyes and felt an overwhelming sense of connection, purer than any stadium roar. It was a moment of profound humility and grace. That, Elvis told Arthur later, his voice choked with emotion. That's what this is all about. That's what I've been missing, feeling truly connected beyond the lights and the applause. The world tour wasn't just a series of concerts. It was a pilgrimage. Elvis was rediscovering himself, his purpose, and the incredible unifying power of his own music. He was shedding the king persona piece by piece, not abandoning it but transforming it into something more authentic, more human. He was no longer a prisoner in a gilded cage. He was a free spirit, soaring across the globe, gathering harmonies and spreading joy, preparing for that one monumental concert that would truly change everything. As the Global Connection tour progressed, it became more than just a series of concerts. It evolved into a worldwide cultural phenomenon. News channels covered his every move, not just the performances, but the humanitarian efforts, the cultural exchanges, and the profound impact Elvis was having on people across the globe. Colonel Parker's attempts to undermine the tour had largely faded, drowned out by the overwhelming wave of positive public opinion. The world had fallen in love with this new, authentic Elvis. But even for Elvis, the physical and emotional toll began to mount. Constant travel, the changing time zones, the endless stream of new faces and experiences. It was exhilarating, yes, but also utterly exhausting. There were moments late at night in anonymous hotel rooms when loneliness would creep in and the sheer magnitude of what he was doing would feel overwhelming. He'd call Priscilla or his father Vernon just to hear familiar voices. He'd spend quiet hours with Joe or Jerry talking about home, about simpler times. There were days when his voice felt hoarse, his body ached, and the enthusiasm he'd felt seemed to wane, replaced by a deep weariness. "I'm tired, fellas," he admitted one morning, rubbing his temples. "Just tired." Arthur Hayes, ever the visionary, but also deeply compassionate, understood. He had built in recovery periods, but the demands were immense. "We're close to the end, Mr. Presley," Arthur would remind him gently. "Just a few more weeks, and then the big one. Culminating concert, the heart of the Global Connection tour, the performance that Arthur had envisioned as a true moment in history. The location had been kept a tightly guarded secret, adding to the intrigue. But now, as the tour wound down its final legs, the announcement was imminent. The chosen location was Jerusalem, a city steeped in history, spirituality, and unfortunately, often in conflict. Arthur had worked for over a year to secure the necessary permits, navigating complex political and religious landscapes. It was an unprecedented undertaking. A concert of peace in a city known for its divisions. Concert would be held in an open area just outside the old city walls, with the ancient stones as a silent witness. It would be broadcast live via satellites to an estimated 1 billion people worldwide, the largest single audience in human history for a non-sporting event. When Arthur finally revealed the location to Elvis, a tremor went through him. "Jerusalem," Elvis whispered, his voice full of reverence. "The Holy Land. That's truly something." The weight on his shoulders felt different now. It wasn't the oppressive weight of the gold cage, but the immense, beautiful weight of hope. The hope of millions, watching, listening, hoping for a message of unity. The pressure was immense, almost suffocating. He was not just performing, he was carrying a message, a prayer. His band and crew rallied around him. They saw his fatigue, but also his unwavering resolve. They knew the significance of this final concert. They adjusted schedules, ensured he got enough rest, and offered quiet encouragement. The camaraderie among the team was strong, forged in shared experiences across continents. They were more than just colleagues. They were a family on a mission. Elvis began to focus his energy on the Jerusalem concert. He worked with his musical director to select songs that carried a message of peace, love, and understanding. He decided to include several gospel numbers, songs that were deeply personal to him, reflecting his faith and his longing for harmony. He rehearsed tirelessly, pushing himself, knowing that this performance had to be perfect, not just musically, but emotionally. He started writing a short personal message he would deliver before his final song, a message that encapsulated everything he had learned and felt on the tour. It was heartfelt, simple, and powerful. As the tour arrived in Athens, the final stop before Jerusalem, the anticipation reached a fever pitch. News reports from around the globe focused on the upcoming concert, analyzing its significance, discussing its potential impact. Critics who had once dismissed him as a Vegas relic now spoke of him as a global ambassador for peace. One night, sitting on the balcony of his hotel room overlooking the ancient Acropolis, Elvis felt a surge of doubt. "What if I can't do it, Joe?" he confessed, his voice barely a whisper. "What if I let everyone down? What if it's too much?" Joe Esposito put a hand on his shoulder. "Elvis, look at what you've already done. Look at the lives you've touched. You brought hope to people all over the world. You already did it. This last concert, it's just the crescendo. You're ready. You were born ready for this." Elvis looked out at the ancient city bathed in the moonlight. He thought of all the faces he had seen, the hands he had shaken, the tears he had shared. Thought of the little girl in the Indian village, the smiles of the children in the London hospital, the quiet respect of the Japanese musicians. He remembered Arthur Hayes's words, "The only failure would be not to try." He took a deep breath, letting the vastness of the moment wash over him. The weight of hope was heavy, yes, but it was also invigorating. It was a burden he was proud to carry. Closed his eyes, picturing Jerusalem, picturing the world. Watching, he would not fail them. He would sing from his heart, and for one night, perhaps, he could truly help the world find its harmony. He was ready for the weight of hope, and ready to turn it into something beautiful. The day of the Jerusalem concert dawned clear and bright. A crisp morning air carrying a hint of anticipation. The atmosphere in the city was electric. Security was tighter than for any event in recent memory. A necessary precaution given the political sensitivities. But beneath the layers of security, a spirit of hope and unity permeated the air. The concert venue, a vast open space just outside the ancient walls, was meticulously prepared. State-of-the-art satellite dishes aimed skyward, ready to beam Elvis's performance to every corner of the planet. News crews from dozens of countries jostled for position. Dignitaries, spiritual leaders, and millions of ordinary people filled the area. A mosaic of cultures and faiths, all united by a single purpose: to witness history. Backstage, Elvis felt a mix of profound calm and intense nerves. He had faced countless stages in his career, but this was different. This wasn't just a show. It was a moment. He walked through the quiet corridors, passing familiar faces. Joe, Jerry, his bandmates, Arthur Hayes, Thomas Miller, each offering a silent nod of encouragement. His voice coach put him through a final warm-up, his vocal cords responding with surprising strength. He dressed in a white jumpsuit custom designed for this concert, simpler than his usual stage wear, but still bearing the iconic Elvis flair, adorned with subtle symbols of peace and unity. Woven into the design, before he walked out, Arthur Hayes put a hand on his shoulder. "Mr. Presley," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "you've already changed the world tonight. You just remind them." Elvis took a deep breath, looked at Joe, who simply winked. He walked towards the stage entrance, the roar of the crowd already deafening. He could feel the eyes of the world on him, not just those in the stadium, but the billions, watching on television, listening on radio. The orchestra began the majestic opening notes of "Also Sprach Zarathustra." Elvis stepped into the blinding spotlights and the entire world seemed to gasp. The crowd erupted into a wave of sound, a roar that reverberated through the ancient stones of Jerusalem and beyond. He took a moment absorbing it all. He saw faces from every walk of life, their eyes fixed on him. And then he began to sing. He opened with "Bridge Over Troubled Water," his voice soaring, powerful, and deeply emotional. Every note was infused with the journey he had taken, the connections he had made, the weariness overcome, the hope embraced. He wasn't just singing, he was sharing his soul. He moved through a set list carefully curated for this historic night. "Can't Help Falling in Love," sung with a tenderness that brought tears to many eyes, arousing suspicious minds that had the stadium on its feet, and a stripped-down, raw version of "Heartbreak Hotel" that reminded everyone of his roots. He included a medley of international folk songs, sung with respect and warmth, further cementing the theme of global connection. But it was his gospel set that truly captivated the world. "How Great Thou Art," "Amazing Grace," and a hauntingly beautiful rendition of "You'll Never Walk Alone" resonated deeply in the holy city. His faith, so often a private matter, was laid bare. A universal message of hope and resilience. Midway through the concert, he paused. The roar of the crowd slowly subsided, replaced by a hushed reverence. The camera zoomed in on his face, broadcasting his every expression to the waiting world. "Ladies and gentlemen," Elvis began, his voice clear, his southern accent gentle. "I've traveled the world these past few months. I've seen so many beautiful places, met so many wonderful people, and what I've learned is that deep down we're all the same. We all want love. We all want peace. We all want a better life for our children." Paused, his eyes scanning the crowd, then looking directly into the main camera, speaking to the billions beyond. "Music, I believe, is a gift from God. It can cross any border, reach any heart. And tonight my prayer is that we can all find a little more understanding, a little more compassion, a little more harmony in our lives. This isn't just my music. This is our music." He ended his message with a simple plea for unity, heartfelt and genuine. Then the opening chords of his final song began. "If I Can Dream." He sang it with every fiber of his being, a powerful, soaring anthem of hope and possibility. His voice was strong, unwavering, a beacon of light against the backdrop of the ancient city. He held nothing back. It was the performance of his life. When the last note faded, the silence in the stadium was profound, then shattered by an explosion of applause, cheers, and emotional cries that echoed across the globe. People in living rooms, town squares, and even remote villages erupted in cheers, waving away tears. The concert had transcended entertainment. It had become a shared experience, a moment of global communion. Elvis stood on stage, bathed in the light, tears streaming down his face. He felt a liberation he had never known, a profound connection to humanity. The weight of hope had been transformed into an overwhelming, beautiful wave of gratitude and joy. He had done it. He had taken his music, his message to the world, and the world had listened. History had indeed been changed. The morning after the Jerusalem concert, the world woke up to a different kind of news. The headlines weren't about war or political strife, but about music, peace, and the judating power of a single voice. "Elvis unites the world," declared one major newspaper. "The King, a messenger of peace," read another. The broadcast had reached an unprecedented audience, sparking conversations, igniting hope, and fostering a sense of global unity rarely seen. Elvis, back in his Jerusalem hotel suite, felt an exhaustion that went bone deep, but it was a sweet, fulfilling weariness. He was not just physically tired, his soul felt cleansed, reborn. He watched news replays of the concert, seeing the faces in the crowd, listening to his own words, and a profound sense of peace settled over him. He had found what he was looking for: purpose beyond fame, connection beyond performance. He called Priscilla and Lisa Marie, their voices filled with pride and emotion. He called his father, who simply said, "Son, your mama would be so proud." Colonel Parker's power, already diminished, effectively crumbled. Public had seen the real Elvis, the one he had tried to keep caged. The legal battles dissolved quietly, settled with Elvis gaining significant creative freedom and a much larger say in his own career. Arthur Hayes and Thomas Miller, the unlikely heroes, emerged as respected figures in the industry, proving that artistic integrity and humanitarian vision could triumph over cynical commercialism. The Global Connection Tour wasn't just a series of concerts, it became a template for a new kind of global entertainment, inspiring artists to use their platforms for social change. Documentaries about the tour won awards, capturing the intimate, behind-the-scenes journey of Elvis's transformation. Elvis didn't disappear after the tour. He returned to Graceland, but it felt different now. No longer a gilded cage, but a sanctuary he chose to inhabit. He continued to make music, but with a renewed sense of passion and purpose. His albums were more personal, more soulful, reflecting the depth of his experiences. He incorporated more gospel, more blues, and even experimented with elements of world music influenced by his travels. His concerts, while fewer and more selective, were legendary, imbued with a maturity and emotional resonance that transcended his earlier shows. He established the Elvis Presley Global Harmony Foundation, using a significant portion of his tour earnings to fund educational programs, cultural exchange initiatives, and peace-building projects. He became a quiet but powerful advocate for human connection, often making surprise visits to schools and charities, always with that genuine warmth that endeared him to everyone. He found a balance in his life, a rhythm that allowed him to be both the iconic performer and the grounded spiritual man he always longed to be. He spent more time with Lisa Marie, instilling in her the values of compassion and curiosity about the world. Pursued his spiritual interests, delving deeper into philosophy and religion, finding solace and strength. Elvis Presley, the king of rock and roll, had found his true kingdom, the hearts of billions united by his music and his message. The weight of gold had been replaced by the richness of experience, the joy of connection, and the profound satisfaction of a life lived with purpose. Years later, sitting on the porch at Graceland, watching the sunset, Elvis often thought back to that moment in his Vegas suite, feeling trapped. He remembered the quiet yes that had started it all. He remembered the roar of the crowds, the faces from every corner of the earth, and the overwhelming feeling of unity in Jerusalem. He had said yes to a world tour, and in doing so, he had said yes to himself. He had changed history, not just with his music, but with his journey. He had shown the world that even the most famous of kings could be a humble servant of harmony. And in that quiet, contented evening, the world continued to hum with the echoes of his global harmonies, a testament to the power of one concert, one voice, and one man's unwavering belief. The new dawn had truly arrived.